Welcome, everyone. Dear MEP Czarnecki, dear ambassadors, distinguished guests, thank you very much for being with us today. I hope you all enjoyed your light lunch, and I'm grateful you could make it here despite your busy schedules and the Omicron wave. I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to MEP Czarnecki, Chair of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group in the European Parliament, and İpek Tekdemir, Secretary General of the group, who kindly host us at the Press Club instead of the European Parliament due to the ongoing restrictions. When I see so many enthusiastic people who are extremely passionate about EU-Turkey relations, I remember my dream when I first came to Brussels in 2008. I will say it out loud. I dreamt of Turkey becoming an EU member state and was keen on getting involved in the accession negotiations. Negotiations had just started, and EU-Turkey legislative and policy alignment was extremely high back then. Fast forward 14 years, and imagine how boring my dream job would have become today. But a glimmer of hope remains, and the civil society has a big role to play in driving positive change. Despite political differences and frustrations from both sides, one thing is clear: the EU and Turkey are bound to work together to face common challenges in their shared geography, a rather unstable one, which stretches from Black Sea to the Caucasus and the Middle East. This became obvious during the migration crisis of 2015, when 1 million refugees flocked to the EU, mainly via Turkey. Against all odds, the two sides agreed on a deal, which, despite some dysfunctionalities and burden-sharing issues, has worked so far. But this is not the only area for cooperation, which both sides would benefit from. To avoid future humanitarian crises, to position themselves in a changing global order and new regional dynamics, the two long-standing partners could benefit from increased cooperation in order to strengthen dialogue in the area of foreign, security, and defense policy. This might prove challenging due to the current differences and divergences on Syria, Libya, the Eastern Mediterranean, Cyprus, and Russia. Yet, imagine what would be the alternative scenario for the EU. Further alienating a NATO partner and a strategic ally who contributed to European security since 1952, including in the Western European Union, and also contributed to EU-led missions, 9 EU-led missions, such as Palestine, Kosovo, Ukraine, Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Congo. What would be the alternative scenario for Turkey? Turning its back on the EU and making alliances with authoritarian states which have no respect for European values such as democracy, fundamental freedoms, human rights, and rule of law? The European security architecture created after the Cold War is currently called into question with shifting US priorities and more assertive Russia, not to mention a rising China. There are around 100,000 troops on Ukraine's borders, which are threatening the stability of both the EU and Turkey. Russia asked NATO forces to leave EU member states, such as Bulgaria and Romania, while selling S-400 missile defense systems to Turkey. At this critical conjuncture, it's high time that both the EU and Turkey review their strategic priorities and find ways to strengthen cooperation in areas of mutual interest, including energy security, to which Turkey contributes via the Southern Gas Corridor. A foreign policy approach based on confrontation and hostility is not the way forward for the EU and Turkey. Their future relationship must be based on strong dialogue and mutual trust if it's to bear fruit and be of a lasting nature. Our Brussels-based think tank, Dialogue for Europe, in cooperation with the Ankara-based European Union and Global Research Association, APCAT, is currently implementing a project called Strengthening Dialogue between the EU and Turkey in the area of migration and security. This project, funded by the European Union under the grant scheme, is a one-year marathon, which started last April. This is the third and last leg of our project, which focuses on foreign, security, and defense cooperation between the EU and Turkey. While we are approaching the finish line, I realized how much I learned from this project, which aims at giving a voice to the civil society, both in Turkey and in the EU. As in the EU-Turkey relations, we have our ups and downs, our differences with our partners. But at the end of the day, we keep engaging in dialogue, try to find a common denominator and agree on common values, or at least respect the perspective of each other. I would like to take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to our delegates from our partner association, who came all the way from Turkey. Don't worry, they all had their PCR tests. Ambassador Selim Kunural, Murat Kavavalı, Can Baydarol, Hatice Yazgan, Haldun Yalçınkaya, Dilaver Arıkan Açar, and our project assistant Efe Can Çeliksoy. They might complain about their busy schedule again, but they will meet with almost everyone who is working on EU-Turkey relations in Brussels this week. We already had meetings with experts from DG NEAR and the European External Action Service, as well as a networking dinner with policymakers, academics, journalists, and civil society representatives. Later, they will meet with journalists, MEPs, cabinet members, and policy analysts while joining a conference at the College of Europe. They'll also meet with the rapporteur for Turkey. During the first leg of our project, which focused on migration cooperation, we held conferences at the Press Club and VUB, as well as meetings at the DG NEAR, DG Home, EAS, and European Parliament, while working with esteemed academics and civil society representatives in Turkey and the EU, who framed policy recommendations to update the EU-Turkey migration deal and to anticipate and prevent future humanitarian crises, such as the ones in Syria and Afghanistan. The second leg of our project was a field trip to our EU delegates, for our EU delegates to Istanbul and Ankara, where we had the opportunity to meet academics and civil society representatives and attended a conference at the top University of Economics and Technology to strengthen migration cooperation and foreign and security policy coordination between the EU and Turkey. Today, we will build on these discussions in view of reaching the overall objective of our project, which is the ultimate alignment of migration, foreign, security, and defense policies of Turkey and the EU, as foreseen in the accession negotiations. We will listen to different policy recommendations by academics and civil society representatives from both the EU and Turkey. The deliberations of all our activities will be published in a booklet at the end of the project, which we believe could guide policymakers in both the EU and Turkey and may fill them with a glimmer of hope for future EU-Turkey relations. Without further ado, let me welcome our panel and invite MEP Czarnecki for his opening speech. As you know, Richard Czarnecki served as Minister for European Integration, Deputy Minister of Culture and Arts, and Minister without portfolio in Poland. Since 2004, he is a member of the European Parliament. Now he's serving as Chair of Delegation of the EU-Russia Parliamentary Cooperation Committee and Vice Chair of the Committee on Petitions. He's also a member of Committee on Development and Subcommittee on Human Rights, and a substitute in the Special Committee on Foreign Interference in all democratic processes in the European Union, including disinformation. Please, MEP Czarnecki, the floor is yours.
Dear ambassadors, dear guests, sevgili AB Türkiye dostları, bugün burada olmaktan çok mutluyum. First of all, I would like to thank Dialogue for Europe for inviting me to the press club for this very important, very prestigious conference. I'm glad to see you, so many civil society actors here today to discuss this important topic and comment you on your EU-funded project on Turkey-EU civil society dialogue for migration and security, whose overall objective is achieving alignment of migration, foreign, security, and defense policies between Turkey and the European Union, as foreseen in the accession negotiation. Civil society has an important role to play in raising awareness about the causes and positive effects of migration to achieve better mutual understanding about common challenges and to bring citizens and different cultures, political and economic systems closer together. As the chair of the EU-Turkey Friendship Group in the European Parliament, I have worked on EU-Turkey relations for many years. Being at the European Union frontiers and hosting EU Border Protection Agency Frontex, Poland, is one of the EU member states directly affected by refugee crisis, as exemplified by events of last few months especially. So strengthening cooperation in the area of migration and managing the external dimension of the European Union new pact of migration and asylum is becoming of really crucial importance. By working together with our neighbors like Turkey and having closer cooperation in the area of foreign security and defense policy can prevent future humanitarian crises like the ones witnessed in Syria and Afghanistan, for example. The migration crisis of 2015, when more than 1 million irregular migrants arrived in the European Union, revealed marked differences in the EU member states' attitudes and weakened their solidarity, as a result of which sustained attempts to reform the common European asylum system have so far failed. Although the volume of irregular arrivals has now decreased to more manageable levels, pressure on some national asylum systems remains high. To make up for the shortcomings of its reception policy, the EU has placed on protecting its external borders and cooperating with the countries of migration, origin and transit, in particular Libya, Turkey and Niger and others, to help them retain or readmit irregular migrants to the European Union. In this context, it's important to mention the global approach to migration and mobility, which is the top of the EU political agenda. This approach seeks to achieve better alignment between the internal and external dimension of all EU policies linked to migration and mobility, foreign policy, development, trade. It rests on 4 pillars. Firstly, organizing and facilitating legal migration and mobility. Secondly, preventing and reducing irregular migration and trafficking in human beings. Thirdly, promoting international protection and enhancing the external dimension of asylum policy. Last one, maximizing the development impact of migration and mobility. The European Council conclusion on 25th June 2021 set out 3 major elements of work on external aspects of migration. Firstly, supporting priority countries of origin and transit, then putting forward action plans for priority countries, and finally inviting the Commission to report on how it intends to make the best possible use of the 10% of the Neighbourhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument Global Europe financial envelope devoted to actions related to migration. This work is underway in the different strands identified in the new Pact of Migration and Asylum. Despite these challenges, the EU-Turkey statement of March 2016 brought support to millions of refugees and migrants in Turkey, Syrians and others. The statement has been significant decrease in the loss of human lives and major reduction of irregular crossings from Turkey to the EU. The subsequent COVID-19 outbreak in Europe had a further negative impact of refugees who are at a high risk of contagion in densely populated camps, while depriving from access to necessities. The pandemic made their socio-economic inclusion in host countries more difficult. Being the European Union 6th largest trading partner, Turkey has also proved to be a staunch ally of the West in the area of security and defense within the framework of NATO since 1952. Notably, During the Cold War, Turkey assumed a crucial responsibility in NATO's security architecture as a defender of the southeastern wing front of the alliance, in addition to contributing to several security operations, peacekeeping missions, and efforts toward combating piracy and terrorism in the post-Cold War era. In addition, Turkey is expected to make a substantial contribution to the European energy security following the completion of the Southern Gas Corridor and other potential energy projects. Finally speaking, these long-standing and strategic ties should be also translated into diplomatic relations between the European Union and Turkey, which have been hampered by recent developments in the Eastern Mediterranean. Both the EU and Turkey shall seek inclusive and constructive approaches and avoid unilateral steps when dealing with such sensitive issues. While the current global political conjuncture may be conducive to chaotic foreign policy decision, lacking vision and coherence, the consequences of isolating a long-term partner and ally should be carefully considered by EU member states, especially given the current developments in the European Union's neighborhood. At the same time, Turkey shall continue to play a bridge role between East and West, while contributing to its diversity and respecting its values. Ladies and gentlemen, a fruitful and long-term cooperation in the field of migration and security could perhaps give a new impetus to Turkey-EU relations, and some progress on the accession negotiations, which have been stalled for several years. In fact, migration and security are key areas where Turkey is a dispensable ally for the EU. Teşekkür ederim. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, MEP Czarnecki, for your comprehensive overview of EU-Turkey relations. And indeed, we were thinking that the migration was only a Euro-Mediterranean problem until recently, but with what happened in Belarus, your country, Poland, was actually very, very impacted. So we saw that it can have very broad-ranging dimensions, the migration issue. With these words, I will give the floor to Ambassador Selim Kuneralp. You may know him because he's been serving in Brussels for many years. He was ambassador to Turkey, and he was serving in Turkish missions in New York, Geneva, Cyprus, and the European Union. And he was an international civil servant at the GATT Secretariat. And he was ambassador to Sweden, Korea, and the European Union and WTO, as well as Deputy Secretary General of the Energy Charter. Please, Ambassador Kuneralp, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eli. Well, Ambassador Bozay, Mr. Czarnecki, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here, all of you. And I'd like to thank Eli for her introduction and for having organized this gathering. Now, I have to stress that because I'm a retired ambassador, as Eli has just said and recalled, anything that I say only represents my views and certainly not those of the Turkish authorities of the day. But of course I have a long-standing interest in Turkey-EU relations, which have a very long history, as you all know. They have gone through many ups and downs. I will not subject you to the details of all these ups and downs, but very briefly, I would say that there have been, in my experience, 3 ups in this relationship, namely the completion of the customs union between Turkey and the European Union back in 1995, the Helsinki Council of 1999, where Turkey was given candidate status, and the actual decision to start these accession negotiations back in 2004. On the other side of the scale, there have been so many downs that I will not try to summarize them. And in any case, one has to look at the positive things rather than the negative things, at least in my experience. But I'd like to also recall that the main thread of our relationship has always been accession to the European Union, and already back in 1959, when Turkey applied for accession to the European Union, or the European Economic Community, to give it its name of the day, of the time, its interest was not just association, but full membership, and it only accepted association because it was told that it did not, and Greece was told the same thing at the same time, I should say, that neither country was ready for full membership of the EEC, and association was offered as a path to facilitate this process of integration, and this followed the traditional Turkish policy that had started, I would say, in the last 2 centuries of the Ottoman Empire, and certainly throughout the first 60, 70 years of the Republic, turning towards the West, and because the West was seen as a way of facilitating Turkey's modernization, and so the wish to accede to the European Union fell in line with that policy, and already Turkey had applied to and become a member of NATO back in 1952, and before that it had been a founding member of the Council of Europe. And I have to recall that its membership of NATO, at any rate, remains a very important anchor in Turkey's foreign policy, and NATO considers Turkey as a very valuable ally. Only last year, Turkey was entrusted with the command of a 5,000 strong NATO rapid intervention force. So throughout the Cold War, it's also useful to remember that Turkey kept 12 Soviet divisions busy on the other side of its border, and these divisions otherwise might have been in Central Europe or Eastern Europe, as it was called in those days. So the customs union was an instrument in helping Turkey reach its goal of accession, and by completing the customs union successfully in 1995, Turkey has demonstrated that it is able to withstand the competition that comes from the West and the European Union, and because there had been doubts about the ability of Turkish industry to survive this, and these doubts have been eliminated. And so the customs union facilitated the next step, which was candidate status, and when back in 2004 the Commission reached the conclusion that Turkey had sufficiently fulfilled the Copenhagen criteria, the decision to start negotiations came fairly naturally. And you have to remember that in those days, Turkey was making great efforts to settle the Cyprus problem, or help settle the Cyprus problem. It was also making great efforts to modernize its legal system, changed the criminal code, the civil code, to align these documents on the European Union norms and standards. So it came as a trauma, I would say, a trauma which still continues today, that in 2004, the United Nations Secretary General, Kofi Annan, submitted a plan for a settlement of the Cyprus problem, and this was accepted by the Turkish Cypriot in the referendum and rejected by the Greek Cypriots on the same day, and so the plan was never implemented, but Cyprus was admitted into the European Union, and this has really been, I would say, a breaking point in our relationship, because since then things have really gone downhill, and but it should also be remembered that Turkey played a useful role in some EU-led operations in the Balkans, in Somalia, before Cyprus's accession blocked Turkey's participation in any further such action. So the Cyprus problem today remains the main obstacle, for further action, not just in relation to foreign relations, security, and defense, which are the focus of today's meeting, but of course the accession negotiations have been basically put on a standstill because of the Cyprus problem. And it is also a fact, of course, that a number of member states of the European Union who had some doubts and hesitations about Turkey's accessions have been able to hide behind the Cyprus problem. But the atmosphere has also changed as a result. In domestic politics, rule of law, freedom of association, media, and so on. There has been some deterioration, which is the result of Turkey and the European Union moving further away from each other. But the fact is that when you consult public opinion today, something like 60% of the public still supports accession to the European Union, but a larger majority believes that it is never going to happen. So you do have an interesting paradox there, and this is all, of course, terribly unfortunate, I have to say, so this deterioration has been observed in all sorts of areas. Take foreign policy, which is the subject today. But I can remember, back in 1999, 2000, when Turkey had become a full member, a candidate for full membership after the Helsinki Council, we made a serious effort to align on EU common positions, and the statistics in those days were over 90%. We also organized briefing sessions for in Ankara for the embassies of the member states on parts of the world like Central Asia, Iran, and so on, where at that time the European Union did not have a very good access. And these meetings were considered to be very, very valuable. Today, if you look at the Commission's report of 2021, October 2021, the proportion of common positions on which Turkey has aligned itself has fallen to 14%. So from over 90, 20 odd years ago, we're down to 14. It's still an improvement over the previous year, where apparently the figure was just 11%. So you might say, if you want to look at things positively again, that there has been a 30% improvement between 2020 and 2021. But I think that's a meager consolation, if any. And of course, with the distancing of Turkey from the European Union and the fact that the public opinion has never been able to understand how in 2004 the Greek Cypriots were rewarded for rejecting the Annan plan, and the Turkish Cypriots were punished for it. There has been a tremendous degree of frustration, and of course interest in Turkey has for a settlement of the Cyprus problem has shrunk as a unavoidable conclusion, and this frustration is not just held in government circles or pro-government media, but everywhere in the public, so something needs to be done there, so what can be done? I think that it is for the European Union to look at a solution. I know that qualified majority vote is not really an option in the Council for this, but the all EU institutions, and you, Mr. Czarnecki, has just reminded us of that. All EU institutions consider that Turkey is a valuable strategic partner, and if I want to quote from some recent examples, for instance, the December 2021 conclusions of the EU Council mention, and I quote, that it is of the EU strategic interest in a stable and secure environment in the Eastern Mediterranean and the development of a cooperative and mutually beneficial relationship with Turkey. This is what the Council said in December. Josep Borrell said that in March 2021, in his report to the Council on relations with Turkey, he said that Turkey is a clear player, a key player in the area of security and defense. And when you look at the Commission's latest report of October 2021, you see similar language. So there is clearly, on the part of the European Union, interest in doing more with Turkey, but how to do it? And in Turkey, I have to say that there is, after many zigzags and U-turns in various directions and so on, the president seems to be interested in re-establishing links with the West in general and the European Union in particular. If I wanted to be cynical, I would say that the dire economic situation in Turkey at the moment might be motivating him in that sense. What needs to be done is for the Union, in one way or the other, to convince the Greek Cypriots that it is not in their interest, as it is not in the interest of the European Union, to block everything. For instance, there could be a number of gestures. We're not talking of resuming the accession negotiations, because there are other obstacles to resumption of the accession negotiations, nor are we talking about deepening of the customs union, but for instance participation in a number of EU-led operations and PESCO and things like that, which are blocked by the Greek Cypriots. Maybe something can be done there. It is, I think, for the union institutions to see what can be done there, because otherwise the status, at best, the status quo will endure in Cyprus, and worse things might happen, and I don't think that it is in the interest of anybody for that to happen. But since we're talking about the future cooperation in areas of defense and security and foreign relations, I have to say from my own perspective that the rather chaotic situation that reigns in all of these areas inside the European Union at the moment is another obstacle. When I look at things, and I remember when the UK left the Union, it was thought that the EU would transform itself into a more homogeneous kind of institution, particularly in the area of foreign policy. Well, this has not happened. Clearly, when I look at Libya, for instance, I can see, at least until recently, that you had one EU member state supporting one faction in Libya, another member state of the EU supporting another faction in Libya. In Ukraine, with respect to Ukraine, at the end of the day, or the beginning, I would say, not at the end of the story yet, but the chaos is even bigger to a very large extent. One doesn't know exactly, who is in charge and what, if any, common position the European Union might evolve on Ukraine. We don't see any sign of that at any rate. From the outside, from Istanbul, where I live, I don't see that very much. So that's another obstacle, for us to work together. But clearly we have common interests, as I mentioned earlier, and as Mr. Czarnecki recalled, and all these texts that I have quoted and several others that I could have quoted to indicate that this is the case. So an effort has to be made, but the effort has to come, at least the first step has to come from the EU side and break the sort of this vicious circle in which we are at the moment. So thank you very much for all of this. I don't know how much time I've taken.
Thank you, Ambassador Kunerat, for your valuable insights. We are learning from you, from your experiences, obviously. And also thank you for mentioning the elephant in the room, Cyprus. So we also had discussions about this with the Commission, and they commented that it's not only the problem is not only Cyprus but other member states as well. So as long as there are council decisions, well, it's apparently it's not only Cyprus which is blocking relations, but also you rightly mentioned the unanimity rule, and to improve foreign policy cooperation within the EU, that's also an important obstacle, obviously. And High Representative Borrell thinks the same way, but what can be done about this? Not much, maybe. Then I would like to give the floor to Kurt de Boeuf, who kindly wrote policy recommendations for us. Sorry, we forgot to change your title here, because he recently became Senior Policy Advisor on Middle East and Africa, and he was former Chief Editor-in-Chief of EU Observer. He's also an Associate Professor at the VUB and Fellow Researcher at the Oxford University. He also served at the ALDE Group of the European Parliament for the Presidency and Middle East Tahrir Institute, and he wrote books about Arab Spring tribalization and similar issues. Please, Kurt. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elise. Well, the title of the conference is How Can We Cooperate Better on the Level of Security and Migration? And I would just like to point out a few areas in which I think that cooperation is not just nice, or it's crucial, it's important, and it's actually already more or less happening. The first one is quite obvious, and I assume that perhaps Amanda will talk more about this, is what we see happening now with Russia and Ukraine. It's not only Macron is flying to Moscow to try to negotiate and de-escalate a situation. It's also Erdogan who is going, and I mean there are ties and that are perhaps closer and more historic between Russia and Turkey than there actually are between France and Russia. Although, I mean, one needs to remind that, as a matter of fact, Russia is not a historic friend of Turkey, rather on the contrary. I mean, I'm not just talking about Crimea and the Southern Caucasus, but in the mind of some Russians, there's still the dream of Catherine the Great, that the final goal of the Russian enlargement is actually taking Constantinople back. So I assume they have right now put this plan into some footnote, but still, I mean, I think the role that Turkey is playing right now and can be playing in the future is crucial. A second region where I think we might even be seeing a breakthrough is in the Southern Caucasus. A few days ago, there has been signed an agreement between Turkey and Armenia to normalize relationship after, well, actually for the first time after the First World War, I think. So, which is obviously the key for a possible normalization between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and a possible peace agreement, who knows, in Nagorno-Karabakh, a conflict that is going on also for decades. So I mean, European Union has been trying to have agreements with Armenia, it's trying to have ties or not having ties with Azerbaijan. It's quite close to Georgia, but it is clear that we will not find any breakthrough in what's going on in the region without Turkish cooperation. And I think that we all perhaps rejoice the fact that a few days ago, finally, this breakthrough has been done with Armenia. A third region or conflict where we desperately need Turkey as the European Union is what we call, at least in Europe, is taking away the reasons for migration. And what is, of course, the reasons for migration? It's war. So the most important reason why we have seen migration in Europe is obviously the civil war in Syria. The problem is that the EU, what we see now is I mean, there's no real plan from the European Union point of view. And what we see from the Middle East perspective is that countries in the Gulf, countries bordering Syria, are right now talking again to the big elephant in the room in this entire conflict, which is Bashar al-Assad. So, and in my opinion, the only country that is actually still resisting this plan and that is still protecting the only free area in Syria is Turkey. So, and that's also the reason that we cannot do anything as European Union to move forward in some solution in Syria without Turkey. It's also clearly that in the entire Astana process, I mean, there was Russia, there was Iran, there was Turkey, there was no European Union. So our only spokesperson there was actually the Republic of Turkey. So if we want to do something on what is called the reasons of migration, I mean, Turkey is our necessary and first partner to do so. In Libya, you already mentioned, Mr. Ambassador, Libya. I mean, well, I'm not going to go into detail, but the division within Europe was one of the reasons why this conflict has dragged on so long. So the peace process that has been started in Geneva and Berlin, I mean, was going into the right direction, but now I think it's stuck again. And between the chicken and the egg, so the discussion in Libya is, can we have elections without a constitution? And on the other hand, can we have a constitution that is not written by elected people? So, and this discussion is already going on for years, and right now, again, the elections have been postponed. But again, in my opinion, the role that Turkey has played in my opinion, a positive role, was actually supporting the government that has been supported and appointed by the United Nations, that had the official support of the European Union, be it not of all its member states, but if not, I think that we would have seen there a regime that would have been an autocracy, if not a dictatorship, for the years, maybe even the decades to come. But I would say that the most important role for Turkey in Europe is, in my opinion, help Europe to avoid a civil war within Europe. These are big words, I know. I've written a book called Tribalization, Why War is Coming, and actually in 2016, and I could say, look at Ukraine, it's coming, but I'm much more worried about inside Europe and what we are seeing, the polarization, the divisions inside Europe, than actually those outside Europe. And as a first point, I think we have to take a look at the Balkans. After the EU in October 2019 actually refused or broke its word to North Macedonia and to Albania to start talks with the EU, which were promised, since then things have gone very much the wrong way. So yesterday, I in a talk, I think I compared it. I mean, if you are preparing for a top sport Olympic achievement, I don't know which one, and you're training and training and training to get there, and on the moment you are actually ready, and it says it's going to be postponed, I mean, all the force and whatever you have done is getting lost, and you're going down. And it's actually what we are seeing in the Balkans. So they have been working forward, they have been making progress, and of course with difficulties, with corruption, difficulties with fraud, and so forth, legal system. We all know that, but they have done their utmost best to get to the point where the EU could say these are reasons enough to start the talks. And when they said, no, we're going to postpone it, we see things gliding back again. We see problems with Srpska Republika, which are obvious. I mean, Bosnia is getting into possibly deep trouble again. We see a polarization going on in Serbia. We see political instability growing in North Macedonia, and so forth. And in each one of these countries, I mean, the EU has lost credibility because it has broken its promises. I mean, pacta sunt servanda, they say in Latin, so pacts and agreements have to be fulfilled. If you don't do that, I mean, you lose credibility. And therefore, again, the country that has some credibility still, and to which people look in a favorable way, is Turkey. So again, I think that Turkey can be of help in avoiding this is a big word, of course, the civil war in the Balkans, but I mean, we have to work now in order to avoid a similar scenario that might be popping up perhaps in a few years from here. But I want to conclude with a perhaps even more worrying evolution, at least in my view, inside Europe, and that is the trend of growing Islamophobia. Look at the French elections, where Eric Zemmour, I mean, you can say he's crazy, but in the polls he's right now having 14%, so which is huge, you know? And he is actually saying we should send the Muslims back to, and so forth, to where they belong, which is a very weird way of talking, because, I mean, before the family of Zemmour lived in Europe, and before even Brussels existed in Europe, I mean, there were Muslims in Europe. Actually, in Spain, Muslims are already there since 1300 years. In Poland, more than 600 years. In Italy, more than 1,000 years. In the Balkans, more than 500 years. So where do you want to send them back? So, and one, just, I'm also a historian, so allow me one historical thing, is that in the right-wing circles, they often use this idea of Vienna, where we stopped the Muslims, the Turks, the Ottomans, however you will call it, and that what the policy that we are having now is actually, and certainly by the accession talks with some of the Balkan countries and with Turkey, it's like, why did we fight and did we go into war for Vienna? Well, and it's pity that our Polish MEP has left, because one crucial force that actually helped against the Ottomans were the Polish. So, exactly, Sobieski. But what people forget is that an important part of the Polish force were actually Muslims. They were Tatars who defended Vienna against the Ottomans. So was this a Christian-Muslim war? No, it was much more complex than that. And almost we forgot that the Ottomans, as always, were supported by France to push against the Habsburgs of Germany and Austria. Okay, sorry about this historical, but it's this entire discourse is just lacks any historical facts. It lacks a view on society that is based on reality. And I think in this discourse, in this that has been used and abused to convince Europeans that there is a big problem in Europe, and that is a problem is Islam, and that is a problem. It's even France. I mean, we were talking about Zemmour. Sorry to go back to France again. The French presidency is right now, as we speak, trying to push for an agenda for laïcité in the EU, talking about countering radicalization. And of course, countering radicalization is not countering Zemmour. No, it's about terrorism, it's Muslim terrorism, and so forth. Well, I think, again, France is wrong. And many countries know that, is that the way to counter radicalization is not to fight the idea of Islam in Europe. The policy that they are trying to do will not de-radicalize. On the contrary, it will fuel again more radicalization, because it's a fight, an identity fight, and it's a wrong identity fight. So I want to conclude here, so that I think that even also in this discourse, I think we might very much need some Turkish historians, some Turkish philosophers, sociologists, in order to get the discourse in Europe a bit on the right track. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kurt. It's always useful to have a perspective from a historian. And you rightly mentioned that there's still room for cooperation for the EU and Turkey in Western Balkans, as it is in Ukraine and other regions. And yeah, prejudices unfortunately form a lot of policies, and we should also be careful and maybe analyze it with sociologists and more historians as well. You're right. So I would like to give the floor to our next speaker, who will probably also elaborate on the issues that was mentioned by Kurt, on especially on migration and the role of terrorism for the security. Professor Dr. Yalçınkaya graduated from Kuleli Military High School and later Turkish Military Academy. During his military service as an officer, he completed his postgraduate studies in international relations in Istanbul University, and then he conducted his postdoctoral studies at Oxford University. He published 2 books on war issues and several academic articles. After serving more than 10 years at the Turkish Military Academy, he has been associate professor in international relations at Tob University of Economics and Technology since 2013. Please, Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elif. Actually, I'd like to thank APCAT and Dialogue for Europe organizing that event. Surely, European Union for supporting, and also thanks to the distinguished listeners coming here. And I am really happy to see my students here, who are also who are here because of Erasmus program and student mobilization. As Murat Kavalalı, chair of APCAT, has been, let's say, highlighting the importance of Erasmus program, student mobilization really matters for the future, because as in a nutshell, as Ambassador described as the history of Turkey and Turkey's accession to European Union for the last 3 decades. I think in the next coming 3 decades we are going to have another let's say, retired ambassadors, unfortunately, without membership. That seems like that. But thanks to that Erasmus program, I mean, sending students to here and receiving students from the European sides, I think this young generation are going to build a better future. What we have built so far, actually, Kuntz really described the theoretical approach, which goes back, I would say, Vienna siege, not Vienna war. But after the Vienna siege, if Ottomans were attempting, the perception in Europe was Ottomans was just pass through the Vienna and then turn left down to the Rome and get to the Roman Empire. So that was the perception and the fear of Europe. I think definitely we need to contemplate on these historical records and their effects to our contemporary life in the 21st century. It really matters. Actually, as a person who studies on security issue, I shouldn't have studied on migration issue, but I have needed to study on migration issue because forced migration became the subject of security. And with my colleague Arikan Açar from Yaşar University, we have conducted research and it's going to be published by Elim. And unfortunately, I have studied migration issue. And the migration and terrorism, these are two fields or two pillars which would be resulted in either in cooperation or in conflict between Turkey and the European Union. These are so controversial subjects it became, and these subjects also raise the importance of, unfortunately, Turkey's position for the European Union. And I would actually, there are different styles of explaining that issue, but I would explain that two subjects with different waves. Wave of flow of people from somewhere to other, from point A to point B. I mean, let's begin with the foreign terrorist fighters, Daesh terrorism. These two pillars emerged after the Syrian crisis and Syrian civil war. This is the case for the last decade. And it first reflected with the Daesh terrorism, since Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi just invited people for hijrat coming to the so-called Islamic State. The people began flowing to the Syria, and most of them were through Turkey. They prefer to access to Syria. And during that period, there were two approaches. One is blaming Turkey as so-called jihadist highway. This was the first reflection to the Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs mainly. And the second, let's say, approach was emerged from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Turkey, and they just provoked international cooperation for preventing their travels through Turkey to Syria. And then, thanks to let's say, constructive approach and constructive mechanisms, we managed to as Turkey, we managed to prevent these travels through Turkey, and then later during that period, international fora, especially from the European allies, Turkey were blamed so much. But instead of blaming, we should have worked. And then when we began working on this issue, constructing that mechanism, it worked. But this was the first wave, and thanks to the efforts in Turkey disregarding with accusations, they constructed, and through the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum and some other mechanisms in international fora for common good, for international common. But through the period after ending the Daesh, and since Daesh lost its territory in Syria and some parts of in Iraq, they needed to come back to their home country, origin of them. So during their return to their home country, most of them were, let's say, not accepted by our European allies. So since they were not accepted by them, and they were deported back to the Europe from Turkey, and then they went back to the Syria again, and they tried to come back again, and then we are in Brussels. Daesh terrorism attacks in Brussels were executed by returned foreign terrorist fighters which had been deported from Turkey to the Belgium. So they executed that activities, and they executed these terrorist activities because of failure of the Belgian government. So what I am trying to tell you, lack of coordination creates a let's say pitfall in international system, international security system, and it results in some terrorist activities. And the third way I want to talk about flow of refugees, forced migrations, people from Syria to Turkey, and through Turkey to Europe. So before 2016, it was a great, let's say, humanitarian disaster we had witnessed, especially on the agency. And all on the agency, the people were trying to pass through the agency. I am the sailor myself. I like to go agency. Very nice place, but it is very hard for refugees, and they couldn't survive in agency. And later, and then in order to prevent that humanitarian disaster, Turkey and the European Union get together. And for the sake of humanity, Turkey took the responsibility, and then Turkey decided to that deal, the 18th of March 2016 deal between Turkey and the European Union. Thanks to that deal, the humanitarian disaster prevented. Yet, for any deal, I mean, ambassador would be would know better than me. I mean, either side needs to care about their interests, and Turkey's interest was not only getting $6 billion, which had already presented by the media, but it was beyond that. There were some precaution, I mean, some measures, short term, middle term, long term. And short term was just handling their problems with the $6 billion euros from Europe to Turkey. But in the middle term and in the long run, Turkey needed to establish a strategy, because in its history, Turkey became first time target country for refugees. So we needed to changing the paradigm, and very interestingly, an institution was established during that period in Turkey, Directorate General Migration Management in Turkey, thanks to the Turkey's accession to European Union. It was coincidence for Turkey establishing that institution, and in Turkish we have an expression: you establish caravan on the way. Kervanı yolda dizeriz. I mean, we established the caravan on its way. Literally, we didn't only establish Migration Management Director General, but also we managed to we tried to manage migration in Turkey. And during that period, and on visa liberation was another word, according to Turkish public, which was pledged by the European Union to Turkey. And in Turkey's public opinion, now we are back of pacta sunt servanda, what Kuntz stated. So it's the failure of pacta sunt, and the pact has not been fulfilled by the European Union. Maybe that perception would be the reason why, as ambassador stated, 14% public support to the European Turkey's accession to the European Union. So what we have been facing for the time being is these two issues, terrorism and migration. If I check them, Turkey did whatever it needs to do, but not the European Union. There are some, let's say, failures of European Union fulfilling their pledges. So that's the problem, I guess. So having said that, having stated all of these issues, I think for Turkey and European Union relations, we could use as leverage this terrorism and migration issue to build a better future for these, European Union and Turkey relations. But in a year, we are going to have elections in Turkey. Let me put another elephant in the room. Every speaker puts, and you need to put one elephant. Okay, you need to stay. So this is habit. This is habit. Sorry about that, Amanda. And my elephant is upcoming, coming, coming elections in Turkey. So in coming elections in Turkey, first time it is history, migration is going to be a case. Migration is going to be, let's say, discourse for even for ruling party, even for opposition parties and alliances in Turkish news system. And in these alliances, they are going to express their thoughts and they create discourses presumably against migration, refugees, presumably against them, not to support them. But the reason for that, I'm sorry, because European Union failed to support Turkey's mid and long-term policies to establish against the, let's say, to handle that issue. And also, these issues happened because of the Syrian crisis. You know, before Syrian crisis, we had Iraq crisis. And then we suffered from the Iraq one. And then later we had this one. I have a candidate for the future problem in the region that would result in as a war. I mean, we all know that we have been discussing for years the position of Iran. I'm just telling you, I mean, if we couldn't get any lessons learned from Syrian crisis, how could we altogether manage the Iranian crisis if it happens? The failures would be devastating. The failure would be devastating, and we need to take lessons from history. And we are living through the history. I think the first threat is the coming elections in Turkey, discourses against refugees, and in the long run, a possible crisis or any crisis in Iran would also result in another migration waves. But I think Turkey took its lesson. I don't know whether the Europe has already taken the lesson. I'm stopping here. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Professor Yalçınkaya, for providing us a Turkish perspective, especially on migration management and foreign fighters and the role of Turkey in stopping terrorism. And I'm actually very happy to see a fellow sailor in the panel. I also like sailing in the Aegean Sea when it feels secure, obviously. Well, it's true that we have to think about long-term solutions if we talk about migration, and the deal was actually intended for a short-term solutions. But what will happen next? That's something we should discuss as well. I see that there are a lot of unfulfilled expectations. So Turkey seemingly has expects things maybe from the European Union side, and there could be potential crisis in other countries that we don't know of. And how would we react, both the EU and Turkey? These are very valid questions. With these words, I'm gonna give the floor to Amanda Paul, who is a geopolitical foreign policy analyst and journalist, also a blogger. Her main areas are Turkish foreign policy, Ukraine, South Caucasus, Eastern Partnership, European Neighborhood Policy, Russia, conflict resolution, and geopolitical issues in the Caspian region. She works as a policy analyst for the European Policy Center and contributes to many newspaper articles on these issues. Amanda, the floor is yours. I'm expecting another elephant right now.
I'm not sure I can come up with another elephant, but I'll try my best. First of all, thank you for the invitation today. It's a bit difficult being the last speaker, I have to say, after these excellent interventions, but I will try my best. I'm going to say a few words about Turkey-EU relations more generally, and then give some specific examples of where I think cooperation can be increased. I mean, first of all, I would say that today Turkey is further away from the EU than it ever has been, and that's saying something. But also, I would say there's been a paradigm shift in the way that the EU deals with Turkey. I mean, it no longer looks at Turkey really as a candidate country, let's be honest. And in some cases, it's not even seen as an ally. I mean, Monsieur Macron is on the record saying that he doesn't consider Turkey to be an ally. It's seen, let's say, more as a competitor or as a problem. Turkey is frequently likened to China and Russia, particularly when it comes to some of its foreign policy activities. Of course, personally, I don't agree with that. I think it's very short-sighted. It's not very strategic, and I think they should be looking at the bigger picture, or perhaps more of a realistic picture. I mean, when we look at the bigger picture, we see now an international order that is really in serious disarray. We have the rise of China, and then the next rise of China, if I could put it that way, a revanchist Russia, and a United States that is obviously much more focused on the Indo-Pacific area, or wants to be more focused on that area. It's been retreating or retrenching from other areas in the world, including in the Middle East. And we hear all the time, particularly these days from Europeans, that the Americans want Europe to be more responsible for their own security. In some cases, I've heard that the Americans are actually going to leave Europe to take care of its own security. I don't believe that for 1 second, but I do think we can expect some downgrading of the US for European security. This makes, in my opinion, middle powers in this new global picture more important. And this includes Turkey. Also, when we're talking about, or how many Europeans like to talk about, strategic autonomy, I think this is only going to be really relevant if we talk about it in the context of alliances. And this also should include Turkey. Now, as has already been said, so I don't want to repeat everything, Turkey has already been a major contributor to European security and transatlantic security. I mean, we already heard about the Cold War, about the CSDP missions. I mean, Turkey's only in one now, and that's in Bosnia, but it plays a very big role there, and it's actually the second biggest contributor to that mission. The migration deal, energy security. Turkey is also flying over the Baltic states because it's part of the NATO Baltic Police Mission. And this is a really important task. We heard from the ambassador about how Turkey headed up the NATO response force in 2021. This is also a very responsible task. And until recently, Turkey headed up the OSCE monitoring mission in Ukraine. And it was also involved in the EU BM in Ukraine, EU AM, sorry. Turkey would still like to be in Ukraine in this EU mission, but for reasons we all know, it's very difficult for Turkey now to get engaged in more CSDP missions. I mean, the days of the past when it was in 9 or 10 have long gone. And we've also heard now how Turkey's alignment with EU foreign policy is really low. I mean, I think this is for three main reasons. First of all, as was mentioned already, I don't want to repeat everything, the accession process basically ran aground. I mean, it was almost killed off before it had a chance to really start, frankly speaking. The second reason is because of democratic backtracking in Turkey. But the third reason, and this is quite a big reason, is because of regional developments, which has made Turkey have a more independent, more proactive and autonomous foreign policy. I mean, in the past, Turkey was almost expected to follow particularly the United States in their foreign policy decisions in that part of the world. But I mean, those days have gone by. And I think, honestly, it's very unrealistic from the side of the EU to expect Turkey to be aligned with developments, particularly in that neighborhood, because the security impact, the strategic objectives are very different. So this doesn't surprise me, and I don't see at any point in the near future there will be any alignment between Turkey in the EU, in the southern neighborhood in particular. But I mean, it's not just about the EU as a whole. It's also been about individual member states, particularly France, which increasingly views Turkey as a geopolitical competitor in a region where it's basically been, the big gun for a very long time. But I could spend a long time talking about French-Turkey relations, but we don't have time for that. I think that Turkey is really interested in being part of EU security and defence initiatives. As was already mentioned in PESCO, particularly there's military mobility, and actually it makes perfect sense that Turkey should be part of that. It's not clear yet whether that will actually happen. And in terms of Turkish involvement in the European Defence Agency, the European Defence Fund, as was mentioned, these have been blocked by member states. Cyprus, Austria, some others. But also the issue of the NATO EU cooperation is also still problematic, and it's been problematic since Cyprus joined the EU. I don't want to blame Cyprus for everything, but let's be fair, it does have a huge responsibility. So I think we can say that not just because of the elections, but also because of the elections, relations are not going to be a bed of roses anytime soon. There's far too many problems that need to be overcome. But that said, as was mentioned already, Turkey and the EU share a lot of common challenges in their neighbourhood and actually beyond. And in my opinion, Turkey should be an essential partner and ally for the EU in dealing with these challenges. It's too easy to say, oh, Turkey is not of interest to us anymore. Their foreign policy is malign. They're selling drones. This is again a very short-sighted view. But again, this is about finding the necessary political will, but perhaps more important, strategic foresight from the side of the EU to progress this. So I just want to mention these and not to take too much time, because some of them have already been mentioned. First of all is this issue of migration and security. I'm guessing when Turkey signed up to the migration deal, it didn't expect those refugees to be staying in Syria all these years. Back in that time, I think there was a sense that they could be leaving in a year or something. Assad would be gone. But this deal is going to remain crucial, and it's important, first of all, that it's fully implemented. First of all, I think that financial assistance to Turkey should be speeded up. This money doesn't go to Ankara, it gets dispersed around NGOs. This is important. I think it's also important that the local ownership and involvement is significantly improved. I also think there should be more discussion about Article 9, therefore increasing dialogue on the future of Syria and looking at ways to improve the lives of those local communities that are already living in the north of Syria, whose lives remain very difficult. We also need to take into consideration what was mentioned, the new flows of people from Afghanistan, but also Pakistan. I know that Turkey and the EU have already been working together to strengthen their border with Iran, but I think there's other areas where they could work together, let's say as a sort of troika, with the countries of that region. I would like to see that Turkey Turkey has an agreement with Iran, but to have Turkey, EU and Iran working together on migration security, also Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, these countries, this would make sense to me. In the Black Sea region, Turkey is the doorman of the Black Sea, right? And it's also on the front line with Russia. Turkey is actually surrounded by Russia. So I think perhaps there's sometimes a lack of understanding as to why Turkey acts so carefully when it comes to the Black Sea. Neither Turkey or the EU wants to see an increase of Russia's presence in this region at all. There's already far too much of it. And war in Ukraine, or another war in Ukraine, would have a major security and economic implications for Turkey. Relations with Russia and whatnot, but I think this is something that needs to be far more greatly considered by the side of the EU. Turkey's always supported a diplomatic solution. It's offered its services as a mediator. Hasn't been taken up yet by President Putin. But I mean, potentially Turkey could also be the host country for the Normandy format, for the talks on the Minsk agreement. I mean, they can no longer be held in Minsk, so they need a new location. So Turkey could definitely be a potential for this. And we should also remember as well that during this crisis, I mean, Turkey has stood shoulder to shoulder with its NATO allies. I mean, there hasn't been 1 centimetre of space between them, and this is important given the times that Turkey's been, criticised for not acting like a NATO member. So I think increased dialogue in this region should definitely be there. Also, as was mentioned by Kurt, on the South Caucasus, in light of the new geopolitical reality, I mean, this can include within the framework of discussions on new transport and communication corridors, on the issue of demarcation and delimitation of the borders. I think having this sort of deepened dialogue would be important, because at the end of the day, the EU has been a loser from the developments in the South Caucasus, along with the United States. I mean, they were on the sidelines during the war, and I think the EU is still trying to find a way to re-engage with the region. I mean, Armenia has had to downgrade its relationship with the EU as Russia has doubled down on its influence, and Georgia is in political crisis with everybody's eyes focused on Ukraine. The malign activities of Russia in Georgia have increased significantly. Okay, I know I'm running out of time. And as what was already mentioned, the EU does need to support this Turkey-Armenia normalization process. I mean, I think we need to distinguish between normalization and reconciliation. Reconciliation is something that will take a much longer time, probably years and years and years. But I think what we've seen so far gives us reason to be positive. And of all the regional initiatives, the new initiatives, I mean, these 3+3 platforms and whatnot, this initiative has probably got the best chance of succeeding, this normalization process. It may be a bit delicate in the beginning, but I think there is a desire from both sides to do it. I mean, the flights have already started to go from Yerevan and Turkey. Whether the border can be opened by the end of this year remains to be seen. The Russians so far have been, playing nice. They obviously have a voice in this as well. But back in 2008, the EU gave important support to civil society and grassroots initiatives to support that process. So I think it's really important that the EU does the same this time, because they need to have buy-in from both societies, and they need to have the active involvement of civil society to legitimize as well this process. So that's something they can do. 2 more points, if I may, or 1 more point, sorry, is related to actually the Sahel region that hasn't been mentioned this morning. Or this afternoon, whichever way it is now. Both Turkey and the EU, I mean the EU plus France, are engaged in the Sahel. France has complained, as perhaps France would, about Turkey undermining its activities there. I'm not sure that's really the case, frankly speaking. But when you look at the sort of things that Turkey's doing, humanitarian aid, development projects, infrastructure, etc., and you compare it to what the EU's doing, they're actually very similar. So I think there should be potential for the EU and Turkey to work in this region. I mean, also because, Sahel is also a potentially dangerous new migration route, not just because of the wars that dominate this region, but also because of these new security challenges that have been mentioned: climate change, drought, food shortages. And I'm not the only one that is calling for this sort of potential cooperation, because a recent report by the Crisis Group also says that Turkey's goals there more or less match the EU. So there is some potential for cooperation there. So I'll leave it there because I know I probably also took up too much time, and I'm sorry I couldn't find a big elephant. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your clear perspectives and to analyze the situation as you do so well, and for your very concrete suggestions as well. I personally like the idea about Turkey being a new mediator to replace Minsk. I mean, why not? It's worth considering at least. Or also Mr. Ambassador had great ideas like organizing briefing sessions on neighbors or on potential crisis between embassies in the EU and Turkey. So these are ideas that are certainly worth exploring. I think we could open the floor for questions and answers if the audience has some, and we'll have a 30-minute discussion before ending the debate. Any questions, please?
My question. My question is about the democratic backsliding of Turkey, which the speakers had mentioned. On the one side, we have Russia being more proactive, threatening the security of Europe. We have China gaining influence, especially in Hungary. And we also have democratic backsliding within Europe, a couple of countries, again, maybe Poland, Hungary. Wouldn't that trivialize Turkey's democratic backsliding and prioritize its strategic importance? I mean, isn't that a good thing if we look relatively what's happening in the world and in Europe?
Thank you. Anyone? Democratic backsliding and.
Okay, maybe very. Yeah, well, no, it's a big elephant. Okay. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of concern in Europe about the backtracking on fundamental rights and freedoms. I mean, I think everybody knows in this room what a serious challenge that is. And I don't think there is going to be a huge change in this scenario in the near future, frankly speaking. I wish I could say the opposite, but I don't believe that. As was mentioned, there's a very important election that's coming up, and all eyes and all efforts are going to be placed on winning that election at whatever cost. I think that this problem of fundamental rights and freedoms, okay, it's an element in Turkey's EU accession process, but I mean, there were problems in that process long before Turkey ever started to backtrack. I don't think this should be an obstacle for strengthening cooperation on regional security and stability and on areas which are of mutual interest to Turkey. To do that would be extremely short-sighted and actually could have negative consequences for the region. I mean, where there's possibilities to bring about greater regional stability and where Turkey and the EU can contribute to that, I think it should be done. And it can also play a role in helping, rebuild trust between the two parties going ahead, because this is a relationship that is totally devoid of trust. I could only hope that in the future, perhaps we're talking post-election, depending on who wins, we will see a new trend in fundamental rights and freedoms in Turkey, that they will improve again. But maybe somebody else wants to contribute.
Maybe I just want to add something. I mean, to use Turkey, Russia, and China in the one sentence, I think it doesn't make sense. I mean, to some extent, at discourse level, there are lots of discussions. But just go back to the Winter Olympic ceremony. Russian leader was invited. He went there. None of the Western leaders' positions were there, and neither Turkey. So, but the Russian leader and the Pakistani leader was in China for the ceremony, opening ceremony, but not the Turkish one. So it reflected, it is seemed like that Turkey would be joining to that ceremony, but even that, let's say, metaphor would be an indicator that the place of Turkey. I just want to say that one. Thank you.
Ambassador Bozay, would you like to take the floor?
Yeah, sure, sure. Rather than asking you a question, I would like to make some comments. First of all, as being a field worker, do you hear me better or yeah? As a field worker, I would like to say what I'm doing at this juncture related with immigration and security. First of all, in the recent months, I was busy with the Belarus migration, and then there was a very good cooperation with the EU. It was very important. There was a flux, and in international law, it wasn't easy to find a way how to prevent this flux. And then we had a very good cooperation with EU authorities, Commission, and at the end, President of Council and Commissioners, Vice President Commissioner Shinas thanked us. But later on, of course, these issues are continuing, and now we are also dealing with what we can do in the eastern borders. As also Professor Yalçınkaya mentioned, there might be another flow, and there might be some other dangers, but already the most possible one was the Afghani flow, and also, of course, at this point, we are having discussions with the EU. Last week, there was a delegation about the new arrangements for the Syrians in Turkey. There are different projects, integration projects, return projects, because it's not that easy for Turkey to have 4 million inside, 3 million in Idlib, having the Russian pressure on them when there is some changes in the other parts of the globe. It might be used as a leverage, and also 1.8 million IDPs going around, and Turkey has this pressure on its borders. Perceptions are very important. You know, when perceptions, when they become ideologies or strategies, when the conditions are changing, it's not easy to change them. This is the EU's problem at this point. As Amanda mentioned, France, and then France is now the carrying the presidency, and Macron says Turkey is not an ally. If I take it from Macron's perspective, as France was supporting Haftar together with Russia, Turkey was also got a call from Sarraj, the legitimate government of Libya. They said that they were surrounded in Tripoli, and Wagner forces were next hill to Tripoli, and Turkey helped. And the reaction of the EU was to have Irini operation. Irini operation, who visited Turkey might know it. It is like Nasrettin Hoca tomb. There are some locks, but there are 2 walls are missing, and it helped Wagner and its supporters to continue. And from French perspective, as they were supporting Wagner, Turkey is not an ally there. And also in Syria, when Lafarge was sending some cement to Kurdish living there, and this cement was used for having some tunnels under Turkey by the terrorist organization, YPG, which the chain of command is the same with the PKK. We are not allied there either, because I don't let my country to be digged down by the French support. And also when there are some issues, and also domestic issues in Southern Caucasia, when Turkey had some better communication and better cooperation with Azerbaijan, when the French side would like to have some sentences in the council resolution to condemn Turkey on its support to Armenia and Azerbaijan, we are not allied there either. But at the end of the day, as Kurt also mentioned, pacta sunt servanda, there are also some other Latin words, rebus sic stantibus. When the conditions change, you should adapt yourself. Now there is, as you mentioned, there is a normalization, and we expect from France to have support for this normalization. It is not reconciliation, but normalization, and there should be a support. In Libya, what happened we saw, and the end result is Mali. France should sit and think why Turkey was insisting on Sahel not to have that much leverage for Wagner powers. And also about Ukraine and other issues, we need to cooperate together, as Professor Yalchinkaya mentioned very clearly, and about all these. This is also a global issue. It is coming, and when we look at the map, the world map, there are some axes. The biggest Chinatown is in Norway, and you make an axis down there, you see Montenegro investments of China. And to put Russia, China, Turkey in the same cluster in the French presidency paper, it is totally wrong approach. And perceptions, if you don't change them, and if you make them strategy, you cannot have the right perspective. And for example, now what we see in Ukraine, Russian troops deployed very rapidly, and it is the problem of all globe. And when you see that in last summer there was NATO exercise, the European powers were mobilized in 5 days, and some of them in 7 days at the borders. Turkish troops, 1,500 Turkish soldiers, were deployed in 48 hours. This is why we applied for PESCO. There should be a perception change if we would like to cooperate, if we would like to have migration and security issues combined together to have all these things. And in that sense, when I have another issue that I'm dealing with, 20 refugees at the border, 12 of them frozen to death. And these are really serious issues. And then we need to have a new perspective. Turkey is more pragmatic, having normalization relations with Armenia, having better relations in Libya, meeting with Ukrainian president. And EU should also look from the eye level to Turkey and also level the playing field when it's discussing with Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Any other questions from the audience, please?
From here. So, first of all, it's really good to see you back, Mr. Yalchinkaya, as a young graduate of Top University of Economics and Technology. Mask? Should I put off the mask? Yes? Okay. Okay. I have so many questions, but I reduced it into 2. The first one is regarding the civil war in the Western Balkans. Mr. Dibov, you said that Turkey can be of help in avoiding a kind of civil war in Western Balkans. So I was wondering what could be the first step in avoiding this? Because do you think is it a diplomatic solution or a dialogue or the very proactive engagement of the civil society? That's my first question. And the second question, anyone of the hosts can answer of that. As a young Turkish woman, actually, when it comes to migration and security, the Conference on the Future of Europe comes to my mind. Yes, it was not mentioned, but I always thought that Turkey should be part of the Conference on the Future of Europe, especially if we say that, yes, Turkey is the target country and Turkey is the core country in terms of European Union security and defense policy, as well as the migration. Turkey, in my perspective, should be a proactive part of this Conference of the Future Europe, especially in the area of security and migration. So do you think, is there any chance in the future, maybe it can be, Turkey can be a proactive part of this Conference of the Future of Europe, maybe active involvement of civil society, maybe involvement of the young people? Because as Turkey, if you say that, if Europe says that Turkey is the target country, but not include Turkey as a part of the Conference of the Future and Union in the core issues, I think that would be resolved. So maybe you would have an opinion on this, issue. Thank you.
Was the second question also for me?
No, anyone can answer. The question is conveyed to you.
On the second question, my answer is yes. I mean, the only problem is that the Conference on the Future for Europe is coming to an end. So fighting for your place at the conference, I mean, should have been done indeed. I mean, that would have been a reflection of 2 years ago. So, but we will see how much that the conference will bring to the table, which is still a big question mark. So, so maybe you should be glad not have been part of it. So we'll see about that. On your first question, That's of course a very open and complex question. I would say that the first thing to be done right now is actually keep on talking to the Bosnian and Srpska Republic authorities. I think that's the most urgent thing to do. So if things are continuing the way they are continuing, then it will go wrong in some way, I mean, or another. So, and I think that there Turkey has a has probably more power, I mean, talking power, diplomatic power than the EU has. So I would start there.
Any other comments from the panel?
Maybe just on your question on the conference on the future of Europe, they didn't add the Balkans or the Eastern Partnership countries either. So everybody has a big, grudge about that. And I agree as well. They should have all been part of it because they're part of Europe at the end of the day.
I think we have 10 more minutes, so you're welcome to ask more questions. I may ask one actually, because it was not mentioned, maybe briefly, but also with what happened with Russia, we found ourselves in an energy crisis, and maybe like right now, possibilities like cooperation with Australia, Qatar, are discussed. Azerbaijan, like many countries, come into place. Into mind to increase cooperation and diversify sources. So what could be done in this area between the EU and Turkey? Maybe Amanda can answer to that.
Well, I think we have already got a good idea about some of the plans of the EU because they were in Baku a few days ago talking about more gas. I mean, Azerbaijan's already an important supplier of natural gas. So it was quite natural to turn again to Azerbaijan to ask them for more gas, or that's how I see it. But I think as well, we need to also reflect a bit on how we got ourselves into this situation in the first place, because, the energy crisis obviously is blamed on the Russians, but the Russians say it's because the EU refused to sign long-term contracts with member states. I mean, this is the crux of the problem, and the reason why nobody wanted to sign a long-term contract was because of the last energy crisis, when Russia turned off the gas to Ukraine because Ukraine hadn't paid its bill. And then, I'm not an expert on energy, by the way, but then the EU decided to choose to become more dependent on spot gas, in addition to these sort of short-term agreements it had with Russia. And now the Russians are basically using this crisis as leverage to get long-term contracts. But I mean, do you trust the Russians or not? That's the question. I mean, from a historical perspective, there hasn't been many cases where Russia has actually turned off the gas to a European country, if my memory serves me correct. This is what I understand, or this is what I've read. Because for Russia, I mean, Europe is its main market, right? So why would you jeopardize that? That's a question. But that doesn't mean that the EU shouldn't have been perhaps more long-sighted in looking for bigger energy reserves, or perhaps not being so drawn into only focusing on new energy, green energy, solar and windmills. I remember around the COP, the Belgian Prime Minister was on the television telling, all of the citizens that by the end of 2024, Belgium, all of our electricity would come from these windmills out in the North Sea. But one has to question that, given sometimes you don't get any wind. So I think it was this crisis came about as a combination of different things. But so far, as what I can see, Azerbaijan and Caspian gas seems to have been the main policy so far, as looking for new sources.
Well, perhaps I can say something. Well, to add to what Amanda has just said, if I can find where this microphone is. Maybe I should get this. Yeah, to add to what Amanda has just said, I think that obviously there is a serious problem for Europe, and we can see European countries and the EU scrambling around for alternative sources. But the supply of gas is not just a question of long-term contracts. It's also a question of infrastructure, and you cannot build infrastructure in one day. And Turkey itself is an energy-poor country, so I do not see what sort of contribution Turkey could bring to the situation that is developing in Europe, because it isn't as if we had our own supplies that we could share. I could also say that as far as Russia's energy policy has been concerned, it is true that they cannot drink the gas, so they have to sell it somewhere. But the Russian policy over the at least past 10, 15 years has been to try to corner the EU market to ensure that there are no other credible sources to Europe than Russia, and eliminate any other possibility, or at least ensure that any other alternative would still be more or less under its own control. So that is why Europe is now looking at LNG alternatives that, to the extent that they are available, because the whole world is stretched now in terms of energy supply. But it is of course a serious crisis, and you can see that from the prices that are going up through the roof, not just in Europe but everywhere else.
Well, I think we covered many different areas, many different regions, and we had a lot of elephants in the room today. They're all big ones, and I think we will probably discuss further on this topic during our conference at the College of Europe tomorrow. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm really grateful for all the contributions. We enriched the debates, and I think we can contribute a bit more to the ongoing dialogue in the foreign policy and security policy between the EU and Turkey. Thank you.